Hello and welcome to Training Tuesday, where we go through weekly tips and tricks to make your career just a little bit more awesome. This week, we are talking about two of the main things that you need to have in place if you're trying to make any sort of transition, whether it's starting your own business, whether it is asking for a raise, asking to change teams, trying to build a more fulfilling role, whatever it is that's going on for you. There are two main themes that I always like to kind of come back to that are so important to have in place. If you're trying to make a transition, the two main things you need to be sure you have are process and accountability. Now, if you're lacking process, what we often see is people who try and they'll put in the work, they'll try their hardest, and yet if they don't know how to get from point A to point B, and what they've been doing so far hasn't been working, more effort doesn't necessarily make it better. Right? It's kind of like the idea of thinking, well, I'm just going to keep running my head into this brick wall and over time it'll eventually crumble, right? Well, maybe not so much. And so if you don't have process, what I highly encourage you to do is to seek out, if you're trying to do something and you don't know how to make that leap, find people who have done that same thing. Find examples. Find ways for you to learn how to do this. And so this is when people turn to books, trainings, courses, anything like that. It's so important to make sure that you have the process in place so that you can actually make the transition. Because again, if you don't have that, willpower is great, but you don't know what steps to be taking. So you're going to be drawing this process out a lot longer than it needs to go. The second thing that people need is actually to focus on accountability. So if you have process and no accountability, the problem is you probably know what needs to be done, but actually doing it isn't happening. And these are often what comes into play of people who I call like the course collectors. I have been a course collector in the past, so no shade on that. But course collectors are people who gather and gather and gather information about what to do for something, but actually doing it becomes a problem. So again, they read a bunch of books, they take a bunch of free courses, they do everything that they can kind of like, it's the crowdsource mentality, but they're not actually bought into making the change, or they don't know how to have that accountability to show up and do the work. And you need both, right? You need an understanding of what to do, and you need to actually do it. And so I wanted to bring those two things to your attention this week, because if there's any sort of transition that you've been trying to make, we're at the latter half of January now, and so it's really the time of year where actually putting in those work to make those changes for those ambitious things that you set at the beginning of the month that may have been your resolutions. Now that it's time to actually make that change, I want to make sure you have both of those things in place for whatever you're working towards. You have the process, you understand what the process is, and you have accountability to actually make it happen. So if you're struggling to make the leap from point A to point B, check to make sure that you have those two things. And I'm curious to hear from you. Is it process you're missing, or is it accountability? So definitely drop it in the comments below. If you need help with either of those and it comes to actually building a more fulfilling career, obviously you know I am here for you. Career Clarity Camp starts this next week, and then our next one starts in spring. So I'm super excited about it. If you have questions about it, you can definitely send me a direct message. But try those tips on for size. Check and see, if I'm trying to make this leap and I'm not able to do it, sit down on paper and say, what piece am I missing? Process or accountability? So start with that exercise, and in the meantime, happy working.